Hello guys, in this video I will try to explain different ways in which you can debug your JavaScript code. The different ways that we will cover in this video are using console.log, using the debugger command, playing around with the sources tab in Chrome, which may have a different name depending on your browser, and finally by using Visual Studio Code and Chrome together to create a seamless debugging experience. So let's get started. So here I've created a simple JavaScript application where the user can enter their name and the reverse of their name will be printed out. So firstly, let's take a quick overview of the code base that we will be working with. So the project structure of this code base is quite simple. We have three files, index.html, app.js and style.css, all inside the same folder, where index.html is the starting point of our program. And within the index.html file, we have imported some style sheets just to make our application look better. And in the body section, we have created a form where we are taking input from the user, which is the name that user wants to reverse. Following this, we have a button to submit our form, and on submission, the submit name function is called with the submission event, which we have defined in our app.js file that we have imported at the end. So let's move on to app.js file where we have defined the submit name function, which takes the submission event as input. And in the first line, we have used the prevent default function to prevent the page from reloading on form submission. Following which we get the input element from the DOM by using the get element by ID function. And then we extract the value of name from that input. Following which we execute our reversal logic where we split the string at every character to create a character array. Then we reverse that array using the reverse function, and finally we use the join function to join the characters and create the string again. After this, we simply print the reversed value in our HTML. And in the style.css file, we just have a few basic styles to make our application look better. Moving forward, let's try to play around with our application to see if it works as expected. So let me enter a name, say Jane Doe, and press the submit button. As we can see that we have got the output, but the output is incorrect as it does not represent the reverse name of Jane Doe. So now let's move forward and debug our application. So firstly, let's try to debug using console.log statements. For that, I'll open my developer tools and switch to the console tab so that we can see the output. So let's move to the app.js file and add a few console.log statements. So firstly, I'm logging the value of name input to check whether we are getting the correct input element from the DOM. Next, let's log the value of name that we are extracting from our input element. Now, as soon as I save that file, my browser auto reloads because I'm using the live server plugin in the VSCode. Let's now try to rerun our application. And we see that we have two logs in the console section. And from the first one, we can validate that we are getting the correct input tag. But from the second log, we can see that we are getting the incorrect value of the name from the input variable. That is because we are using a wrong property name to get the value of the input tag, and when we replace it with value and rerun our application, we will see that we get the correct output, which is the reverse name of Jane Doe. Now as you can see, using the console log statements, we were able to identify the error, but if we were not aware that the correct value resides inside this property, we would have not been able to fix it. Now let's move forward to understand how we can use the debugger statement to debug this code. So I'll replace both the console log statements with debugger. And now when I try to run this program, it will take me to the sources tab of Chrome. And what the debugger statement does is it actually pauses the execution of your code at that statement so that you can validate and debug up till that point. So by the time we reach the first debugger statement, we can see that we already have the value of name input. And when you hover over it, you'll get the list of all the properties that it contains. And when you scroll down to the bottom, you can see that the property value has the correct value of the name that user has entered. Now, as we talked earlier that our code is paused at the moment, to move to the next debugger statement, we have to press the play button, which will take it to the next debugger breakpoint. And when we reach here, we can get the value of all the variables that are above this statement because the code has executed up till this point. So here we can easily check that we have the correct value Jane Doe in our variable name. Now instead of adding debugger statement again and again in your code, you can put breakpoints through the sources tab as well. And you can do so by clicking on the line where you want the code execution to pause so that you can inspect and see what is happening. And if now I press the play button, the execution will stop at that breakpoint and you will have access to all the values above that breakpoint. So these are two easy ways to add breakpoints to your application. Now let's remove all the breakpoints and talk about the different sections that we have in the sources section. On the left hand side, you can see we have the complete directory structure of our project, that is all the three files that we have in our project. The app.js file which is currently open, the index.file which contains our HTML, and the style.css file which contains our CSS. So this works as a mini code editor within your browser where you have the list of all the files on the left and the open files on the right, where you can also make changes to your code within the browser. But one thing to note here is the changes you make within the browser won't reflect on the original code base and they will be lost as soon as you refresh your browser. Although there is a way to link your original workspace to the browser, but we'll not get into that. Now moving forward, the breakpoint section will contain a list of all the breakpoints that you have in your program. The call stack will contain all the function calls that happen and in the sequence they happen within your program. The scope section will contain all the variables that are available in the scope of your program. And using the watch section, you can watch certain variables and understand how their value change while you go through your program. So now let me rerun the application and walk you through all these sections. Firstly, let's remove all the debugger statements and add a few breakpoints through the browser. As you can see, as soon as I add these breakpoints, the list of breakpoints gets updated down below. And let's say using the watch feature, I want to watch the change in values of the name variable. So now let's run our program again. And when we click submit, we see that our program stops at the first breakpoint and the value of name at this point is undefined. And within the call stack section, you can see that we get the name of all the function calls that happen during the execution of this program. And within the scope section, we can get all the local and global variables that exist within the execution scope of our program. Now let's go to the watch section and resume our program. As you can see, when we reach the second breakpoint, the value in the name variable is updated and we get the value as Jane Doe. And the same is reflected in our watch section where we are watching that variable for any value change. Now that we understand how we can use breakpoints, call stack, scope and watch section to debug our application, let's try to take this a step further and add these capabilities to our Visual Studio Code itself so that we can write and debug code at the same place. Now to add Chrome-like debugging capabilities to VS Code, go to the Extensions tab and install the extension Debugger for Chrome. After installing this extension, go to the Run and Debug section and click on Run and Debug. Now from the list of options, select Chrome and this will open up a launch.json file where you can configure the port and settings of your application. Now as my application is running on the port 5500, I'll update the same here and save the settings. Now this launch.json file will be present in the root directory of your project under the .vscode folder and you can modify the settings anytime you want from here. Let's go back to our debug section and switch to app.js file. Now to start a debugging session, we'll simply click the play icon on the top, which will open a Chrome window with the application running on the port number you specified. Now moving back to VS Code, we can see that we have all the different sections from the sources tab in Chrome available in our VS Code, where we also have a console at the bottom where we get the output of all the console.log statements. So now let's try to debug our application using VS Code. And wherever you want to add breakpoints in your code, you can do that by simply clicking the line number where you wish to add the breakpoint. Now let's also add one console.log statement to see the output in the console below. Now let's enter a name and run our application. And we can see that execution has stopped where we added breakpoints. And to move forward, you can simply press the play button, which will take it to the next breakpoint. And as we did in Chrome, you can inspect the value at every step by hovering over the variable. And whatever console logs you put in, you get the output in the console below. Also looking at the variable sections, you can see the value every variable holds while traversing through your breakpoints. Similarly, you can add variables to the watch section if you want to track their values. and all the function calls are listed on the call stack in the order they execute. Now if you wish to close your debug session, you can do that by pressing the stop button, which will close the Chrome browser and the debugging session. I hope this video was helpful for you to understand how we can debug JavaScript applications. And thank you for watching.